Henry, I'd like you to think again about Laura. My wife of 7 years was preparing for a date despite our prior discussions. Henry, we've talked about this. I'm going and he wants me and I want him. You need to accept it, she said, pausing her makeup routine to address me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This was the same woman who. She'd been my rock for years as I tried to reason with her. La's tone shifted, revealing a calculated edge. She warned me that I'd be financially and emotionally disadvantaged if I chose to divorce her. Her sudden transformation left me. I was confused. Was this really Laura, or was this just a facade? I didn't understand why she was mentioning my mother's hypothetical approval. It just added to my confusion. It seemed like Laura was trying to manipulate me. She was trying to assert her power in our marriage. This was a stark departure from the woman I thought I knew. I thought I knew my mother. She used the same tactics with my dad when I was young. He eventually accepted his role, and you will too. It won't be easy. Male pride is delicate and resistant, but you'll see that the easiest path is to simply agree. She finished her makeup with a practiced hand. Laura was undeniably. She was stunning, with an Armenian heritage that gave her a captivating allure. Her dark skin and sleek black hair were a striking contrast to her slightly petite nose, which she had once bemoaned. Now, it added to her exotic charm, complementing her deep brown eyes. When we exchanged ves, I truly believed I had found a treasure in her. Laura, if you go through with this, I'm not going to stick around, I said, looking at her. She looked at me as if I were a clueless fool. Darling, I know this is difficult for you, but I do love you. She tried to soften her stance. I married you because I love you, and because you're a great husband and father. Other men are just physical. Pleasures for me, I need more than one person can provide. But if you stop resisting, I'll reward you upon my return. Did she truly believe that was an enticing proposition? Her tone became serious as she continued. You may not agree with it, but you'll come to accept it, just like everything else. Who can't change won't. He wants me exclusively, but I'll still care for you in other ways. Her words struck me with a sense of finality. Why did you leave me and go to him? I suggested, frustration seeping into my voice. She laughed at the motion. I've told you, Henry, no one man can fulfill all my needs. Besides, he earns a mere $27. He's nobody at the warehouse. We need your income to sustain the lifestyle that I and our children deserve. I realized she hadn't mentioned loving me once. How do I look? She inquired, prompting me to notice the absence of affection in her words. Terrible, I replied. She chuckled. You're just trying to be cruel, but that's precisely what I expected. She grabbed her purse, slipping in her ID, a spare lipstick and some emergency cash before heading to the front door. As she attempted to kiss me goodbye, I turned my head, allowing her. She kissed my cheek, which made me feel a bit uneasy. Henry, I know this will be challenging for you, she began, her tone reassuring. It's not what you anticipated for your life, but you'll adjust. You may even come to appreciate the newfound lack of responsibility. Everything will work out in the end. You'll see. You're somewhat of a soldier accustomed to following orders. It'll all fall into place with those words. She hurried out the door, leaving me with some time to spare. It was only around 7. Just to give you a heads up, it's 30 p.m. I started thinking about what she said about my military service. I realized she'd never really talked about that part of my life. Maybe being a soldier was the only thing she could relate to. But I knew that military service was about more than just following orders, so I decided to call her mother. I thought she might know more than they did. When I told Margaret what Laura had said, she seemed surprised. I'd never fully grasped the extent of Laura's influence on her father until now. Margaret echoed Laura's sentiments, insisting that women were naturally suited to lead and must utilize all available means to maintain that advantage. I was struggling to contain my incredulity. My primary role is to provide financial support in raising children, just like Gary. Margaret nodded her head in agreement, assuring me that Laura's loyalty to another man was only temporary and necessary to establish the proper dynamic at the beginning. Once you fully embrace your role, there will be plenty of opportunities to please her. However, her words did little to assuage my growing unease. In reality, she relies on you as her husband, and societal norms dictate that you're the one she lives with. She needs your support to keep a cool head and run the family like a well-oiled machine. Margaret, you nailed it. It all makes sense to me. I'm glad I could help. I know it might seem harsh and like a big change, but you'll get used to it and might even enjoy the role you're taking on. I'm sure you're right, but please make sure the girls are in bed by 9:30. Of course, Henry is unhappy and will respect your wishes in that regard. We women are not unreasonable. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have further questions. Perhaps I can provide answers that are clearer than Laura's. Margaret's involvement in the matter will not be without consequences. While she won't face physical harm, I believe the repercussions she'll endure will be more emotionally impactful. You see, I was well aware of Laura's intentions. In fact, Laura was too trusting, assuming I would simply go along with the events unfolding day by day. However, she had underestimated me. Something in her behavior hinted at forthcoming changes. So I reached out to a few of my colleagues to assist me in what they excelled at. Alan, the sharpest among us, possessed extensive knowledge of surveillance and electronic security. While he was in Ronan's units abroad, he listened in on Laura's conversations through her car, purse, and cell phone. He had lots of audio recordings of her conversations with her mother, friends, and lover about their plans. I thought that some of her other acquaintances might be doing something similar, depending on what happened with Laura. David was good at Mark, now an executive director, had access to the company's private jet, which he could use with minimal oversight. Then there were Jason, Carl, and Dennis, also known as JD. These guys were adept fighters, skilled in various weapons and marksmanship. The plan commenced at 10:30 p.m. It's 10:30. I asked the kids to be in bed by 9:30 was an important part of the plan. I packed a few suitcases for myself and the kids, putting items of personal and sentimental value in, while clothes were included. The majority of the luggage consisted of toys for the kids. Clothes could easily be replaced once everything was loaded into the car. On my way to visit relatives, I pulled up outside Margaret and Gary's house. I could see the glow of the living room where Laura's parents were watching TV. I got out of the car and found JD, who was keeping a lookout. Jason gave me a quick update. The kids were tucked up by 9. It'll probably be 30 minutes before they're asleep. The people inside have been watching TV since 10. At 10, the husband made a few trips to the kitchen for drinks and snacks. But that was about it for now. We're ready to proceed, just give the word. Let's do it, I replied decisively, moving towards the house. If it weren't for prior knowledge of their presence, they would have gone unnoticed. They relied solely on manual tools. No automation was necessary for this operation. Meanwhile, I stood back and observed the living room carefully, noting how the team entered and swiftly subdued Margaret and Gary. Eventually, I made my way to the front door and stepped inside Margaret's. The voice filled the air, pleading, "Please don't harm us. You must have the wrong people. We haven't done anything. Our granddaughters are sleeping in the next room. Please just let us go, we won't tell anyone." She noticed my entrance and fell silent. "What's happening? Henry, is Laura behind this? If you don't let us go, Henry, what's going on?" I spoke in a tone I'd never used with her before, catching her off guard. "Neither you nor Laura can stop this. I suggest you listen to what I had to say. Save your questions until the end." While we conversed, JD calmly and efficiently. I tied them to chairs in the dining room. These men were true experts of their craft. Margaret and Gary would remain bound until someone released them or they managed to break free. "Margaret, Gary, I've made a decision. I refuse to accept the future you and your daughter are trying to dictate to me. It may be tempting to live my life in servitude to her and shift all responsibility onto her, but I simply don't believe it will work for me. You've been involved in this, essentially supporting her. That means you'll face some consequences too. What might those be?" Margaret interrupted sarcastically. "I asked you to wait until the end to ask questions. I'll give you all the information you need, but since you've asked, I'll answer that question now. In my view, the consequence that will hurt you the most is that you'll never see your granddaughters again, Henry." "No, please, don't do that. You can't. Please don't," Margaret pleaded desperately. I raised my hands to stop her rambling. "I can and I will, but Laura is still young. Perhaps she'll find a replacement for you over time." Suddenly, Margaret became aggressive, attempting to seize control. "We'll find you, Henry. We won't spare any expense to track you down. You know we have money. You'll regret this. You can try, Marvit, but you're wrong about one thing: you don't have any money. What are you talking about? Margaret asked, sounding incredulous. Well, as one of the consequences of never seeing your grandchildren again, certain measures were necessary to prevent you from taking that action. So I took the regrettable step of emptying all your bank accounts, except for enough to sustain you for a month or two. This includes your investment accounts and even that secret bank. The account you and Laura opened as a backup fund, which you thought I didn't know about. How could you do this? Marvette exclaimed. As you can see, it's evident that you underestimated the resources available to me due to my military career. That's how I gained control of almost every penny of yours, including cash advances on all your credit cards. Before you even consider coming after me, you'll have to contend with an overwhelming, crushing debt. Gary, I hope you're not planning on retiring anytime soon. On the other hand, I'll never have to work again. Gary remained silent, his gaze fixed on me. Perhaps part of him hoped I'd extend an offer to take him along. The good news is that you'll be together. I continued. The silver lining is that you'll be together. I continued. Laura won't be able to afford the house since she doesn't work, and even selling that property won't yield much. Her credit cards are canceled, and yours are nearly. You'll be low on funds, so you won't be able to attract attention in searches. She'll have to move in with you. Between the three of you, you'll make it work. We'll still find a way. I'm looking forward to it. In fact, I'll give you a little hint to help. Don't bother searching within the U.S. We won't be here, and don't bother looking for Henry Raleigh or Lai Weston. After tonight, these identities won't exist, at least on paper. I said my goodbyes and went to wake up the girls. Daddy, they said together, looking at me. We packed their belongings and I told them we were going on a little trip. They seemed excited, saying how Mom must be excited too. I told them we'd talk about it later. We went to the private airstrip where Mark's corporate plane was waiting. Jason took my car to a local motel, which was a good move to throw off any. Once we were on board, the girls were fascinated by the space. It was a far cry from a commercial flight. We settled in and, as we flew, I explained to them that things had changed and we wouldn't be seeing Mom, Grandma, and Grandpa anymore. We discussed their new names and where we'd be living. They were initially sad and tearful, but I was confident they'd adapt. After all, they were still young, just like Laura. ID arrived home from the date at 3. It was 30 in the morning and there were no romantic entanglements. We met at a bar, had a few drinks, and then headed back to his place. Tonight was enjoyable, not just because of the guy I initially met, but also because we picked up a couple of his friends at the bar. So it turned into a group hangout. Henry needed to understand that I required. It wasn't a criticism of him. More than he could provide, it wasn't a criticism of him. No man could fulfill all my needs. I hadn't felt truly content for a long time until tonight. I pressed the garage door open with a button and waited for it to lift. It wasn't surprising that H's spot was empty. Dad had reacted the same way as Mom had told me. I hoped everything would proceed smoothly. Everything went well, but as my mom said, it was going to be tough for Henry to accept our situation. I was more affected by his absence than I thought I would be, but it just showed how much I loved him. I knew he would come home soon. He loved the kids too much to stay away. I couldn't help but laugh at the thought of him coming back, maybe even asking me to let him serve me just to see the girls. But Henry still hadn't returned. It wasn't unexpected, but the longer he stayed away, the more determined I became to receive an apology from him. After a long shower, I got into bed and quickly fell asleep. It was about 10. It was 30 in the morning when I called my parents' house to check on the girls, but there was no answer. I tried their mobile phones next, but still got no reply. It seemed odd that they weren't answering, so after 30 minutes of unsuccessful attempts, I decided to drive over to their house. Their car was parked outside, and everything appeared normal. I half expected them to step out, assuming they were busy and hadn't heard their phones ringing. When I entered through the front door, I called out, "Mom, Dad," but got no response. I couldn't believe my ears. I rushed into the living room and saw them both tied to chairs, unconscious. "Dad, what happened?" I started untying them as Mom explained through gasps. "Oh, Henry took the kids. Laura, he took them." "What do you mean, Mom? Henry did this to you and then took the girls. I'll never see them again." The weight of her words left me reeling. I never imagined he was capable of such actions. There had to be another explanation. After freeing Mom, I instructed her to sit down and quickly dialed Henry's mobile phone. I was determined to resolve the situation. I hoped he would return with my children. I anticipated a call from Laura. When it came, I let it ring 4 times before finally answering. My heart was pounding. I was feeling pretty anxious. I said hello, but there was no answer. I called again, but the line went dead. I called back, and she picked up. I said, "Laura, this is your last chance to talk nicely. If I hang up again, it'll be the last time you hear from me." I could tell she was annoyed, but she finally said, "Yes, I understand what's going on. Why were my parents tied up, and where are my kids?" I decided to answer her questions. "Laura, first of all, you no longer have children. They're with me now, and you won't see them again." Laura objected, but I cut in. "Language like that will end this conversation right now. I'm only keeping this line open for one last exchange after a hang-up. If you want answers, you need to mind your turn." Her demeanor shifted instantly. She seemed to think she could still sway me, but she needed to understand the gravity of the situation. She was unaware, she was wrong, "I'm sorry, but I'm upset." She said, "Imagine how I felt when I learned that my parents and children disappeared." I replied, "Imagine how I felt when I learned I'd have to support my wife while she was with other men and being denied children. None of this would have happened if you'd been faithful." She said she was just trying to provoke me into fighting for her. "We've been married for 7 years. I didn't have to fight for you." I countered, "Willin, I just want to feel desired." She persisted, "That's not true, and you know it." I rebutted, "Your mother explained everything to me. I know my role as a provider, and I'm fulfilling my duties well. All the other men would serve to fulfill your desires. Now you're free to try to shift the blame onto someone else. You were foolish to think I'd accept the accusations you're trying to pin on me. Henry, please forgive me. Just give me back my children. I'll do anything," Laura pleaded. "Laura, you've shown your true colors. As I already told your mother, you can try to find us, but we live under different names in another country. We have new birth certificates that don't even indicate you're their mother, so there's no paper trail for you to pursue. I'm actually glad my parents died in that car crash. It would have complicated our departure. Goodbye, Laura." I heard her shouting my name as I disconnected the call and tossed the phone into the water.